Now I'm pleased to introduce photographer Lynn Gilbert, gallerist and art consultant Lonnie Efron of the Ilon Art Gallery, and later Gabe Kirsheimer, book editor, will come in. Feel free to tell us more about yourselves, and take it away, Lynn and Lonnie.
Um, okay. I'm a photographer, I'm a documentary storyteller, and I've photographed areas of society that have not been photographed before. I find that I have to have a concept of what I want to photograph, and I have to feel passionate about it. And that's what I've been doing. And one thing has led me to another. I started with my own children, then I photographed children all over New York City, doing children in different socioeconomic backgrounds. And then I did women, the key women in the second wave of the women's movement, and houses in Turkey, which sounds wild, sounds very different, but it's not. It's about the soul of the houses, and then a garden. And Lonnie, let's hear from you.
Thanks for having me. My name is Lonnie Efron. I'm 52. I'm so excited to be on the show. Welcome to Ilon Art Gallery. I started my career back in the 90s working with Annie Leibovitz. I was her black and white printer, and I became her archivist. I found there was this little need in the industry to help photographers like Lynn and Annie get organized and help monetize and do all really great stuff with all their really great photos. I've been lucky enough to be a photo editor, a book editor, and a curator. And in 2014, I opened Ilon Art Gallery, and I was a fine art photography gallery. Over COVID, I started meeting really great street artists and painters, and I went online to artsy.net, and then I reopened after COVID, and I've been a fine art gallery now. Behind me, I'm really proud to present Women by Lynn Gilbert. And
you have a video walkthrough. Let me see if I can play that.
We may do a little recording of a little bit of the gallery, but most parts of the gallery are really the parts that we're showing Lynn's work.
Wow, I caught a glimpse of Bella Abzug in one of the photos that you showed, and I also noticed that a lot of the children, they each have their own personalities. They're all very expressive. Is that kind of how you what you wanted to capture?
Absolutely. And what I found is that when my kids were born, I was going to be a fashion designer. I had no intention of being a photographer. I didn't even have a camera. Or maybe I did, I don't remember. I used my father's old camera, and I wanted to document them. And I went into their school and I asked the head of the school, could I photograph my kids? I'll raise money for the school, take other kids. And that's how I got started. Because what I found was so fascinating is that kids have their own sense of identity. And they're like mini adults, you know, they're not children. We see them as laughing and playful. They see themselves as fully fleshed out. And that's what I captured. And that's what enabled me to go on. When I photographed women, I was looking for that same essence of what each person is.
And you also have you have one or two themes that you wanted to talk about. One was about mistakes, and
Yes,
one was about
disappointment.
success. So,
Yes,
I just wanted to start your, you prepared some slides to talk
right.
about it with examples of your photography, and also we're not ashamed of our age here in in coming of age. We're anti-ageism, so I'm proud to be 61. If you guys want to share your age, that's okay. If you don't want to, that's fine.
And I am very happy to say that I'm 85, going on 25, and I have years to go. I tell the kids I'm not going to be around long, and they say, "Ma, you're going to be around for a long time."
And you have a lifetime of
Absolutely.
stories just from your photographic
Right.
journey, right? And Lonnie, also, you have uh, a lot of experience behind you as well. So tell us more about the first slide, disappointments and mistakes.
The thing that if you go, okay, I'm going to go, can I go quickly through the children's pictures? I'll just show quickly. I think some of my friends are on, but I think for other people who haven't seen them, it gives me an opportunity to explain. This is where I started with my own children, and you can go through. These are the ones in school where if you look at this particular picture, look at this little girl when you go back with her cap on and her hand up, she's negotiating. And I mean, this is a business, this is serious business. So what I did then was at home, I started photographing my own children formally, and I, looked for body language and for the things that were most typical of them. And then I went into doing children all over the city. And I went to schools with my portfolio. I wanted children in different socioeconomic backgrounds. I had to have a concept. And what fascinated me, I did over 107 families. And out of that, I would say Lonnie said I got 3 dozen. I'd say I got 12. I got 12 pictures that I love. And I needed to have these, I needed, to have them acknowledged. What was I doing right? What was I doing wrong? And I went to Arnie Glimcher. I showed him, he was a friend. I showed him my pictures. He said, do my kids. And right after that, he had me do Nevelson. The Nevelson portrait
First, we
was,
have to say who Nevelson is. Louise
oh, okay.
Nevelson.
Okay. Nevelson is one of the greatest artists of the 20th century, and she was recognized for her monumental on-site sculptures, and that she broke through the male bastion, which no one had done before. And she was a powerful force, and that I had never photographed an adult before. So I got my friends to come over. I said, I've got to test out, what I'm going to do. I don't want to be caught photographing an adult, which is very different than photographing a child. So that is the series that I did of her. And she said those were the best ones she had. So I never got recognition. Actually, I did get some recognition for my children's pictures. I took them to Arnold Newman. And Arnold Newman, when I went to his house, he kept looking at them. He said, oh, oh, oh. And I went home and I
is
said,
Arnold Newman a critic, or what does he do?
He was a famous photographer he was actually, the way I got to him, he was my aunt and uncle. My aunt and uncle were his children's godparents. And he's photographed all the presidents and Stravinsky. He's a very well-known photographer. So when I went to him and he said, I came home and I said to Ronnie, my husband, and I said, he hated them. And he said, take my master class. Anyhow, I went to take his master class. And when I walked in, he said, these are the best children's pictures that I've seen after Lewis Carroll. Now, the reason I'm saying that is not to congratulate myself, but just to tell you 50 years passed and I have not had any real recognition of my children's pictures. And so what I did at that time, I said, okay, I'll do a book on women. I had a calling card. I used the Nevelson portrait, and I figured I'd do a book. What happened, which was really extraordinary, I went into a rabbit hole. There was no information about women who had made major contributions. So the book that I did is a first of its kind. And that too was not recognized until 2018, even though it's in 623 libraries worldwide, in Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. But in terms of getting recognition, not much. So, you keep going and you live. What I've learned is, what is success? Success is something that it's like it's vapor. You don't know whether it's there or it's not there. You've got to create a life of something that you feel is worthwhile. So when I did the book, some of the women were well known, and some like these were not well known. They're, world renowned. Grace Murray Hopper invented COBOL, which transformed numbers into words. That's how we got the internet. A battleship is named after her. Denise Scott Brown is one of the foremost architects in the world, most influential. Again, these people were not known. So that was part of my life. And that ended. It was like, you have to move on.
And the children and the women, this was all in the 70s or 60s and 70s?
It was in the 70s, and it took me 5 years to do the book. Part of it was translated into Japanese. Currently, it is offered in Kindle, individual chapters, or a group of the whole thing is offered in Kindle. And the book, it got wonderful reviews. It's like living history. But what I find, and that's why I talk about success, I felt it was a success for me. I think that most people, that I'm in a group, a professional group of photographers, and what I hear is people don't feel that they have been either rewarded financially or with recognition. And I don't see anybody that's really happy. And that was a turning point for me, of listening to people and saying, you live one life. You can't live with sadness. You've got to make the life that gives you pleasure. So instead of worrying about what I didn't get, or, that I didn't get recognition for the children's pictures, or, I don't think, I'm certainly not making money at this, is do what you love to do and get the satisfaction out of that. And that is the success.
Very nice. Now, should we go into the Silk Roads
Sure.
series? Okay.
Yes. I love that. This is
how did you decide to go and do a Silk Road series, and how did you get in?
I've traveled.
How old you were too when you started this project?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Don't forget to tell everyone how old you were when you started this project.
Listen, I'm 25 all the time. When I physically started it, I was in my 70s. And I've traveled all over the world. And one of my passions is I go to museums. The other passion is that I go to see houses. And because my husband was in the irrigation business and he wanted me to come with him, I've traveled, all over. And so that when I started doing the houses in Turkey, I had used to go to the Javits Center, where they still have it, but when they first started, the New York Times did a travel expo, and all the representatives of travel agencies were there, and I would spend the whole day. And I came across somebody who represented Turkey. I'd never been to Turkey. So when I went over to her, and she said that she was a lapsed banker, and she was acting as a travel agent. I said, I'm going to Turkmenistan and Uzbekistan, and I'll come by Turkey if you'll be my guide. And that started me off. And what I did in the first 4 trips that I took, I went to see gypsies because that was another passion. And what I did is I would walk down in the, in the rural areas, everybody stands in the doorway. So I would walk down the road and there's somebody standing in the doorway, and I'd point to my cameras and invite myself into their houses. And almost nobody turned me down. The problem with doing that is it's hit or miss. So I accumulated enough of a portfolio that when I got a official travel agent, that they could take me into the houses and the government set up the appointments. Now I want to talk about disappointment. I went to you saw the picture before, Safranbolu is a World Heritage Site. And it's one of the great, oh my God, it's a really great little city. And it's a very hilly, and I have heavy equipment. So there was one of these golf carts. Here's the town. You can see how it's hilly and it's all cobblestone. So this guy said he knew a house, he would take me to see a house. So if you go to the next picture, Jeff, I go to the house and look what he took me to. I said, I'm to myself, I'm not there long. I get into a house with this garbage, and I'm going to have to take pictures of the house, because you can't walk into somebody's house and say, I don't like it, I'm not going to take pictures. So if you go to the next picture, you'll see what I got. I got something that knocked my socks off.
Same house?
Yes, it's the same house. So here's the thing that I learned from this. First of all, this is a historic house, and the houses in Safranbolu cannot be sold outside to foreigners. And like the pools are set up in these homes because men like to talk, and they can hang their feet over the edge of the pool and riffle the water so nobody hears them.
Someone's asking, what is the name of the town?
Safranbolu. And it's a beautiful town. It's really worth visiting. And if you see, Arafat's portrait is virtually in every house in Turkey. He is honored by everybody. And this is one of those, Arafat. He was the former president of Turkey who reformed Turkey. Now, this happens to be a historic home, and it has been photographed. And if you look at the ceiling, you see that in many of these, great homes. This was owned, surprisingly, by nomads. He was nomads are people who, travel, they go to one place and they travel elsewhere. It was in the family for 200 years. And the boys who owned the house, the sons, wanted to sell it. I don't know what the parents were going to do. A house like this goes for about $1 million. They're not, they're nomads. And I think he was a carpenter. So I don't know what happened to the house. But here's an example where I went somewhere, and what I got, the next picture you'll see is, it's a cover of my book on this. Oh, that's another picture that I took. I said, oh my God, that room's a mess. And when I look back on it, I said, that's exactly what I go for. I want a room that looks like it's lived in. You have a sense of the people who live there. And it wasn't until I've been putting together some of these talks that I'm giving, and I go back into a picture like that, I say, oh my God, that is so wonderful, which I didn't realize at the time. So I learn as I go.
Oh, Renee corrected us. He is Kemal Ataturk, the founder of modern Turkey,
Yes.
not Arafat. Okay.
Oh, thank you. Tell her thank you. Renee, thank you. Big mistake.
Okay. Okay, let's go to
So
the book cover. So this became
this
a
is the cover. That's the cover of my book. So many times, each of the experiences that I had that started out as disappointments turned into successes, meaning success for me. It's not a success maybe for somebody else, but that gave me great joy.
Okay, and here's one where you started ground
Oh,
level.
well, this is an amazing story for me. I was supposed to go to Syria, and I think it was in 2010, maybe it was, or maybe 2008. I'm not sure which year, but 4 people had been shot in Syria, I think in Damascus. And I had had an opportunity to go to some of the great homes, and this was through Assad, whom I didn't know, but somebody who knew somebody who knew somebody. Most of the houses that I went to were very modest. And to get into great houses, which wasn't really my goal, but was still would have been a wonderful experience, I had to decide, am I going or am I not going? And I always, when I make a decision that's major like this, I talk to about half a dozen people, and then I make up my mind. And they said, you can't go, you can't take a risk. So if you show the next picture, you'll see the picture that I got, which was upstairs. That is an amazing picture for multiple reasons, because it represents the best of design in Turkey. It's a humble home, and what they did was to utilize the bare ceiling, it's the wood, and then you have the wood on the right side that cut through the wall. It creates like a painting. And the only thing that I moved was the broom. I felt the broom was better at the end of the wall. So this particular picture won a prize. I think it won first prize. And if you look at the next picture that I have, you'll see what happened. It's a poster for a show, and then you can show where I had the show, which was like the equivalent of Lincoln Center. Now, I was heartbroken that I couldn't get to Syria. This is a success. And this kind of lesson that I learned out of this is there's no one thing that you do that's going to take you to the right place. You don't know where you're going to go. And that if
For
you
those
leave
who
the
can't
door,
see, it's the
pardon me?
Ahmed Adnan Sagan Arts Center in Izmir,
Yes,
Turkey, 2013.
yes,
Just in case people can't see it.
right. And this was a big event, and it was a big event for me also. So again, the disappointment and I really sweated it out whether I was going or I wasn't going. And this taught me a lesson. Don't worry where you go, just go somewhere. Something's going to happen. And here's another instance, and this one was major. This was the last trip I took in Turkey where I had a different travel agent. And she had assured me that I was going to get houses as I had before that the government would pick for me, which I didn't get. And I went into one village. What I've learned is you go to a restaurant and you ask a waiter to get you into a house. Once you get into one house, they'll tell you the neighbor next door. So I wasn't getting that. And we stopped somebody, on a village street somewhere and asked where we could go to a house. Well, they took one look at me, and I wasn't dressed, I'm dressed, and they thought I came to the town to rob them of their gold. So I got hauled into the police station, which took me an hour to get there and back. And he saw that I didn't look like I was going to take their gold. And so we went from house to house. I went in one house, I had to walk over a dead cat. I was in another house where it was so bad, there were fleas, and I should have left. I'm always afraid of leaving, that I'm going to miss something. So I said, I don't think this place has been vacuumed in years. And it turned out the man who lived there had been divorced 30 years before, and I don't think he ever vacuumed. So, by the time I got into a village, and all the houses were boarded up, there were 5 that were open. And my guide said to me, let's go in. And I said, you know what? I really have had it. I'm very tired and I don't want to go into another house. And I certainly don't want to go into this one. He said, you're here. Why don't you go in? So we went in, and I'm going to show you what I got. You have the next one. The next one, no, go back. This one. This one, I've done thousands of rooms. This one, I still see it. Every time I see it, my heart explodes because it is so extraordinary. You don't see houses of this level of sophistication, of pattern and color and design, and it is so well thought out. And it just, every time I look at it, it thrills me. So here's another example of a disappointment turning into a success. Now, if somebody else were to look at this picture, they'd say, so big deal, what's so good about it? But
Yeah.
when you've done as
So the picture before is the same house, right? This is,
yes, that's the interior.
amazing.
It's a shock. And you never know what you're going to get. So this is the success for me of my life, of learning that the rules that you make and what your expectations are not necessarily what is going to be the result. And that the success is opening my life up to the fact that I can take whatever experience comes along, and I know that something's going to happen. It might not be what I want, but it might be a lot better.
Tell us about how suddenly in 2018, the photos of women became known as something historic.
So what happened with this again is I have a friend, a very fine dealer, Spencer Throckmorton of Throckmorton Fine Art. And I had had years and years of my Silk Road pictures. And I needed, again, when I say validation, I'm not looking for somebody to say, oh, yes, they're terrific, or, they're going to show them or whatever. I just want feedback. And he was telling me about a show that he was doing called Fame. So I said, oh, gee, I have women's portraits. And I pulled out my women's portraits, and he showed my portrait of Barbara Walters. And that got written up in the Wall Street Journal, and that opened the door. So what happened after that is that Spencer gave me a show at APAD, which it's the biggest photography and the most prestigious show in the country. And he gave me a wall with the 12 portraits of these women that I had photographed that today, 50 years ago, they weren't all that well known. Now they're, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a rock star. So the Washington Post wrote it up about it being, these portraits being iconic, and that the book itself was revolutionary for acknowledging the accomplishments of women. So I said, oh, finally somebody's acknowledging this. So it's still, it's in the air, but not a lot has happened. And Gabe now, I have these chapters as I am doing these talks, and I'm taking quotes out and I'm reading it, and I'm saying, Jeff, I said, it is so wonderful. Forget that it's mine. This is 50 years ago. I'm reading something like it's fresh. It's like they're talking to me. They're talking about their personal lives and what had happened. The reason that I was able to get the pictures that I did enormous research. You have to make people feel comfortable when you photograph them. You can't just walk in and take a picture. You have to find a common ground. What is better than a common ground is talk to somebody about themselves. Everybody loves that. So I was able to do that. And what, everybody was too busy. And then they had such a good time. I stayed afterwards and they told me these marvelous stories. So I went home and I wrote everything down. So I have I have pages on each person of these incredible stories that they told. And the book is, in their own voices that, they're interviewed and these stories come out. So they're personal stories. Now, Gabe, I was unhappy with this was done about 20 years ago. How long ago, Lonnie? I guess or I don't know, 15 years ago, whatever it is, long time ago. So I decided that I don't like the font. So Gabe has been editing it for me, and I have a great graphic designer, John Malcolmson, and he's redoing it. And the stories are coming out now. And Gabe said, I'm going to let Gabe speak for himself. Yes.
No, it's an extraordinary collection of interviews. I suspect it is unequaled as far as the number of women and their fame and their influence and their importance to American culture and global culture, really, and also it captures a certain moment in time when I guess this was described as the second wave of feminism, and these extraordinary women tell extraordinary stories of their struggles and accomplishments in this with this background. While this movement is moving forward and women are gaining tremendous strides in their quest for equality. So it's an extraordinary collection of interviews with leading women. I've never seen anything like it. I don't think there really is anything like it. There are lots of anthologies, but this is a purpose-driven collection where Lynn crafted a complete portrait of these women, not just the photograph, but the copious notes that Lynn took and that the writer Galen Moore worked with, produced these incredible stories, like Lynn says, told in their own words, and of these women across disciplines, the arts, the sciences. It's a fascinating read, and I think it should be translated into all the languages of the world. I think it's a very important collection that was really widely influential. These women were extremely influential in their fields, and these stories have mostly never been told before. And so now they're being re-released digitally, and we hope to have them translated into other languages from the original English. And it's the most interesting editing job I've ever had. So I'm very grateful to be part of the process. Yeah.
And
really.
before this book, there was no such thing, right? You were telling me.
There was, what happened when I went to do the research, what I was surprised with, librarians are really extraordinary people. They are a fount of information. There isn't anything that they can't find. And one of the things that came up was they would say, oh, so-and-so got an award. Well, I didn't know what these awards represented. What's the point of saying, an award if you don't know what they're doing? And I was more interested in what they were doing. And what I found is I went for lists. I said, okay, I'll find a list. Took me a long time to find one. And the one that I found was 1971. And it was the Ladies' Home Journal. And the Ladies' Home Journal picked the women like Rosemary Wood, who was secretary to President Kennedy, or Rose Kennedy, or Jacqueline Kennedy. And I thought, okay, that's not what I'm looking for. I'm looking for women who have really contributed. And then it was a quest of, I don't know who they are. So what I did was, the first thing that I did was to break up the world into what are the disciplines. You know, you can pick art, you can pick science, you've got to do it accurately. Then you have to find who are the experts in the field, and you can't rely on one, and you can't even rely on two, because two people might have two different people. So I had three people in each field. I had 100 experts who ended up selecting the key women, and I did a balance. I didn't do like I'm going to have a lot on dance or a lot on painting. I did the balance as best that they were enabled me to do, so that it reflected what was happening in society and our culture at that time. So it's a very, very accurate representation. And when you look at, and one of the people that I like to pick to talk about is Grace Mary Hopper. When I went to photograph her, she was an admiral, and I went down, a lot of these people turned me down 10 or 12 times, and I just never take no for an answer. I would say, you have to be in it. So-and-so's in it. You've got to be in it too. So I went down to Washington to photograph her, and I went down in the basement. I had to go down 2 sub-basements, and I went along this long corridor that was filled with old, crappy, machinery. And I get to her little office that was stacked full of equipment, and she pulled out a box that was about this size, and she said, you know what? They had mainframes then. She said, one day they're going to have a computer that's this size. And who knew that they were going to? It's amazing. And she then later on was that they have most people haven't heard of her. She's major important, and they named a battleship after her. And they also, Yale named one of the buildings. It took them 10 years to get the name of a building for her. Then I have to tell you another story quickly about the sciences. The sciences are major. You cannot do anything without the sciences. And I didn't realize that there are 14 major disciplines for science. And within them, there are multiple disciplines. So I went to do the sciences. There's not one single word in any library on the women in sciences. So I thought, okay, what am I going to do? I can't do a book. I can't, if you're going to complete it, you've got to complete it. So I went to, in those days, they didn't have many telephones in the library. So I went downstairs on the street and I called my husband. I said, I can't do it. It's not doable. He said, stop feeling sorry for yourself and get back to work. So what I ended up doing was using the yellow pages and went down everything in the yellow pages looking for science organizations. So to make a long story short, I got to a Dr. Wu. Dr. Wu said to me, I'm not that important. Well, taking a picture and doing it, taking the picture isn't the big deal. It's, the work afterwards. So I thought, okay, if she's not that important, I'm not going to do her. And I realized later on that she was major. And not only was she so major, that the work that she produced, which was parody of, and I can't tell you because it's too complicated, but something 200.
Yeah, she overturned the long-standing notion about parody, and in that quantum realm that she's in over there. And everybody thought it was always supposed to be, symmetrical, I believe. And then she proved it wasn't always like that. And she was the first person to do this.
Wow.
So that overturned the whole big principle of science there.
Well, the story.
We have a question. We have a question, real quick question. Renee is asking, will the book be republished and when will it be released?
It's in Kindle now. And the chapters, what?
Well, don't forget, with Gabe here, we've been re-releasing the chapters. We have 3 right now that are available on Lynn's website. And as we finish editing and redoing the next ones, we'll keep adding them onto her website.
And thanks to Gabe, who is a fantastic editor. I've never had anybody edit like this. I mean, he is an absolute perfectionist. He went in all the experts that I had, he went down every name to see that it was spelled accurately. He said, your lawyer's name was spelled inaccurately. I thought, oh my God, thank God for Gabe. So I am incredibly grateful.
Wow. Well, then your slides go on to talk about what happened last year at the Venice Biennale. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, now
What
that
is
is
the Venice Biennale for those in the audience who might not have heard of it?
okay. The Venice Biennale is the major event in the art world, and that thanks to Lonnie, and it really is thanks to Lonnie that we went to the Venice Biennale. She said, we're going to the Venice Biennale. And I thought, that's chutzpah. But I always listen to Lonnie. And not only did we go, but a young woman who had worked with me, who became a documentary filmmaker, went with us also. And the reason that I learned how, this is another thing that I learned from experience. You can go through these quickly, Jeff. Go to the Venice part. And I'll talk about that afterwards.
I also encourage Lynn that we go to the Biennale because it was such an extraordinary thing that was happening with this photo. But on top of it, she had just won a competition last fall for the Siena Photo Festival, which is a really big deal. And she didn't go to collect her award and to be part of the festival. And she completely regretted it. So we didn't want to have any more regrets.
What I always felt
Okay.
is if you get an award is an award. Why do you have to make a big deal out of it? You know, it's the work that counts. But what I realize is that meeting other people who, you know, are doing, you know, wonderful things. So when we got to the Venice Biennale, and actually the portrait of Nevelson became the symbol. It's the first time in the events of the Biennale that it was 90% women. And this portrait represented the whole Biennale, and it was plastered everywhere.
That's huge, huge, huge.
Well, this picture is here. Not only, this is where the Nevelson exhibition was, and in San Marcos Square.
So, you know, I'm grateful to Lonnie. Lonnie gives me incredibly good advice. Sometimes I say, this is silly. I don't want to do it to myself. And I do it. And she's always right. You know, she has incredibly good insight and judgment. And it was understanding the impact of what this portrait was. It was on the back of the catalog, and it was on merchandise. And I want to add here, you know, I can say it's because it's a great portrait. That's not necessarily, it's part of it, but it's the fact that you know, that all these events came together. It was an event about women's art. It was the fact that Nevelson, this was her 60th anniversary. It was also the first time that the Procurati, the building, was opened. There were two shows there, Anselm Kiefer and Nevelson, and also that Arnie Glimcher must have spent, and I have to say, he spent a fortune on promoting Nevelson, and she had lost the polish that she had had in the firmament of art, and he was bringing it back. And I just happened to have the picture that represented her. So
This is Arnie Glimpscher on the left.
no,
No.
right?
No.
He's the hairdresser for the Queen of Sweden.
Oh,
Who became
Arnie
a
Glimpscher is who? Is what gallery is he?
Pace Gallery.
Pace. And that's
So
one of the renowned in the world, right?
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah.
So the thing that I
I
discovered,
jumped ahead. I'm sorry.
oh, that's okay.
Because
The
you were
thing
going to
that I
talk about
discovered,
Arnie.
I was researching how important is the Venice Biennale. The Venice Biennale is considered the Olympics of the art world. So I thought, okay, I wonder how many times have they had one portrait represent the Biennale? And I started calling around. I called Spencer, who knows the art world, and he said it's unlikely. And there's Jack Block, who's, an older man who's the travel agent for all the art dealers. He said, look, you can claim it. It's so unlikely. And my friend here, Johan Hellstrom, from Sweden, knew the director of the president of the Biennale, who said in 25 years no other portrait had been, and it would be very rare. I'm guessing that it might be the only portrait that has, it's such a huge event. And if it was, the irony is that was my first formal portrait of an adult. And it would
And let's
be
go
wonderful.
back. Yeah, let's
So,
go back to 2018 to
okay.
the kiosks, right?
Oh, the
Let me see if I can
kiosks
get
are
that.
a major part of my life, because let me just go through these quickly, and you can start there. The kiosks for the show of the women's show, where there were 23 all over the city, and if you go keep going here, you can see that they're all over the city. And they were also Billie Jean King and Barbara Walters. And what happened is I called up Arnie. I heard that he was having a show. And I said, Arnie, I didn't speak to him. I spoke to the gallery. I said, look, they were having a show in 2 weeks. Please, would you use my portrait? And they said, no. So I said, they are hanging the show. They can't. So I thought, okay, I don't take no for an answer. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 2 kiosks. One's near your gallery. Put my picture in the show. They said, all right, it's going to be a graphic. It's going to be very small. So when I got there, it's 9 feet tall. Now, the thing about this portrait that I think is that Arnie was going to use somebody else's artwork for the Biennale. And shortly before the Biennale, he called me up and he said, we used to be friends before he's very important. And, this was another world. So he calls me up and I said to him, Arnie, what's up? This is like God calling. He said, we'd like to use your portrait for the Biennale. He said, is it okay? I said, yes, it's more than okay. So that's what happened. And I think that when he saw the impact of this in his gallery, this was in 2018, it hit home, how powerful it was. And I'm guessing, I don't know, but I know that the portrait that he was going to use was not, it was a wonderful portrait that was a environmental portrait. This one is a portrait of her. So I gave him 2 kiosks and I got that on the wall. But the story with the kiosk, these are the other ones that were up. The story with the kiosk, if you show the ones with the children's, Jeff, I had them all over the city for the following year. And what I realized, it's all about the light, and that you have to get the light right. And I'd get up at, for the garden, I'd get up at 3:30. For that, this is Arnie's son, there. And that was an accident. That guy who had the red jacket on, and I was with one of the kids who was working with me. I said, oh, you got to get this real quick. So this is one of my favorite pictures. So what I learned out of doing the
I worked
kiosk.
on that block.
What, oh, you did?
Yeah,
So
that's the
you must have,
Hippodrome building, right?
did you see that?
I wasn't working there at the time. We had moved, but I
Oh,
recognize it. Yeah.
so what I got out of that is it's the light, the light, the light. And so when I went to do the garden, I learned I had a map and I got a sun app, and I learned it's like a train schedule. I said, okay, it's 6 in the morning, I have to be here, 6:30, I have to be there. And I knew exactly where the light was going to be. And I knew what the plantings were going to be, because I also had from from each state, you can figure out where the color is going to be. So here I knew, like this is where the pagoda is. And I knew that over here is right over there Oh, I'm putting my finger in it. You can't see it. I knew where the stump garden would be. So I was able to figure it out mathematically. And it's both a science and an art, and sticking rigorously to knowing where you have to be and when you have to be. So, and it's also understanding, like, this caused me such grief because I kept thinking, I'm going to get it better. It's going to be better. And I spent 2 years worrying about it. And then I found out I could never get it as good as that. And instead of having the joy of what I did, I had the angst of thinking I could do better. So I'm not doing that anymore.
I love it though. Yeah, it reminds me of Monet and just the reflections of the trees and the clouds and
What's the next
sky
one?
that you capture. And that's also very Monet, yeah, to me. And then this one you said was a disappointment at first.
Yeah, and I have a whole series. I have a dozen of them. If you show the next one, I think it's the next one or the one before, that one is just glorious. It's ethereal. And I got in the boat, because I had one of the kids row me in the boat. And I'm looking at these dying pods and I'm saying, I was so upset. And I've done many, many times in the boat, early in the morning. This probably was, of all the series I've gotten individual pictures, this was the best series that I ever got. And it doesn't happen. And then I have these where I was able to get, because I knew where the light would be and I knew at what time of year. If you show, I have pairs of pictures so you can show them, the same place. Then with this, I did on the lake where I got the swans on the back of the lake. And this is the stump garden. I think there are only a few stump garden in the country. And Prince, or I should say that Charles, the king now, he has a stump garden. A stump garden is when the trees are uprooted and you use the stump for art and to
Show us the
create.
next picture, Jeff.
Pardon me?
I was just saying that the next picture shows you the stump garden without all the leaves from the trees.
Right. And then you have and this is my all-time, I have over 6,000 pictures of the garden. This is my ultimate picture of the garden. And it was a one-shot deal. I got this before I used the Light app. And you have to be at the right place in the right time, and it's very difficult. The garden, the property is 35 acres. The part that I photographed was 8 acres, and I had somebody drive me around because it was hilly, and I had equipment, and I always need to have somebody with me. You can't, unless you know where the light is going to be, you can't do this. So that I look at the pictures now, and they give me absolute joy, because I knew how to get these pictures now.
And you also know how to select them, because if you took 6,000 pictures, you had to find which ones are the ones that are really worth noting.
I have spent,
right?
You're right, and I've spent hundreds and hundreds of hours, if not 1,000 hours, looking. If you show the next one, that's magical. That is something I did. It's not edited. That is what it was. That happens. There's 12 minutes when the light changes, when the sun is coming up, and it happens very rapidly. It goes from black to light. And that this one is, I didn't adjust it anything. I just lightened it so that you can't get that split second, so that it is what it really was.
Oh, and one last question. What is the name of this garden?
It's called, well, I don't want to say, it's Ed's Garden. And the man who was the owner, he died. And I had gone up on a garden conservancy. I knew him for years. And I said to him, Ed, I want to photograph your garden. And he said to me, we'll see about it. And I'm thinking, How can he say that to me? I have my pictures in the National Portrait Gallery. How can he say, we'll think about it? So I called my son up. I said, I think he's crazy. And it turned out somebody else was photographing it and he didn't want to step on his toes. And he said, we'll do it when he's done. I said, Ed, I'm 80. I think I was 81 at the time. And Ed was 10 years older. I said, I'm not going to be around long. I need to do it now. So he called him up and he said, I could do it, and I spent it.
Thank you all for coming. I'm so glad that you could be here with us. And audience also, thank you so much.